Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about, well, this is the first of a 5-week series of injury prevention for runners. And today's topic is why it's important to keep your hamstrings strong, especially on the left, and how much to stretch or not stretch your hamstrings, and why it might not be helpful to be stretching your hamstrings, or when you might need to, how to do it properly. So first, let's talk about why it's important to keep your hamstrings strong. So basically, the anatomy of running is that it's a very extended activity. That means that when you're running, your trunk, your spine is in an extended position. So your back arches a little bit, your pelvis will tip forward, and your rib cage will tip up. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually helpful in high intensity sports that require a lot of strength because that extended position is a strong position. So for those of you who are sprinters that need to run really fast with explosive speed, that extension pattern is very beneficial to you. And you want to support that. The problem occurs, and I see this a lot with distance runners or people who are putting in a lot of miles. The problem occurs when we are doing our run and we're getting extended because running is an extension activity. And then we come back from our run and we don't ever get to come out of that extension. So just sitting here watching this video, you shouldn't be in an extended pattern. Your body should be able to re-neutralize. And if you're not neutralizing before you go on your next run, and then after you get back from your run, if your body doesn't know how to find neutral, as in not extended, not flexed, just stacked rib cage over pelvis, if your body doesn't know how to find that before and after runs, then each time you run, you're getting more and more and more and more extended. So that's problematic because while extension is a very strong pattern, it does not allow for rotation. And the example I often give of this is Steve Irwin, Crocodile Hunter. I don't know if you guys remember him, but when I was growing up, that was a really popular show. And he would wrestle alligators and crocodiles. And the way that he would kind of subdue them is he would come up behind them and wrap them around their neck and pull them back and up like that. So essentially, he was extending their spines. And that completely disabled the alligator or crocodile because the way that they move is they kind of, rotate through their spine to wrap around their prey and kind of like grab it in their mouth and wrap around it. So that alligator can't rotate his spine, he can't really be a threat to the crocodile hunter. So how is that relevant to us? So just like every animal who has a spine, we need to be able to rotate our spine, to be able to breathe well, to be able to move well, to be able to alternate right, left, right, left, right, left, especially the spine area around our rib cage and thorax. So this region is really important for us to be able to rotate easily and equally side to side, especially when we're running. There are a few reasons for this. Primarily, when we're able to alternate our rib cage rotating right, left, then we are able to pump air out of one side, air into another side, and we're able to go in and out of a flexion state or a neutral state where our lower front ribs are coming down and in, and then we can put air into our lower back ribs. So when we're very extended and running, we're kind of just breathing into here. And our ribs are coming up in the front. Our lower ribs are kind of coming up to drive us forward. But the issue with that is there's not a lot of lung here. most of our lung is back and down here. And if we should note that that lower back lung area, that's where there's the highest ratio of blood supply to alveoli, which are the little sacs in your lungs. So basically, you're getting the most oxygen from your lungs to your bloodstream for you to be able to perform the work you need to do for running when you're breathing into your lower back ribs. So that rotation allows us to pump air, and it allows us to pump air where it needs to go. That's very important. Another important part of being able to rotate your upper rib cage when you run is that when you can't rotate your rib cage when you run, and conversely rotate your pelvis in the opposite direction, you are still moving right, left, right, left, right, left. So your body finds other joints to rotate from. So that might be your knees or your ankles, or you might be over rotating at your neck or at your SI joints. And so we start to develop pain patterns in lots of different areas when we don't rotate well. So how does this come back to our hamstrings? Well, we discovered, or we talked about, that if you are extended, you can't rotate. You need to get neutral, which is flexion pattern, ribs coming down, pelvis coming under. And the hamstrings are one of the primary muscle groups that are going to help you stay flexed and neutral when you're upright, aka when you're running. So the way this works is an extension pattern. My hamstrings, which attach right here at the place where my thigh bone kind of just comes up into my pelvis. And when I'm extended, you can see that this sit bone is coming further away from the back of my knee, and that hamstring is lengthening. My pelvis is tipping forward, and my front ribs are coming up in the front. So from the base, if I can tighten my hamstrings, shorten my hamstrings, tone them up, thunk, then we get our pelvis to come back to neutral, and our rib cage has to stack on neutral on top of it. Those two go together, a rib cage and a pelvis. They copy what the other one does. That has to be true, because if I tip my pelvis forward without popping my ribs up, then I'm just going to fall forward. And if I try and tuck my pelvis under while still keeping my ribs up, I'm going to fall backwards. So we use those hamstrings to educate our pelvis and our ribs down into neutral so that we can rotate when we run. So I'm going to show you an exercise now that is going to help you tone up both of your hamstrings in a way that's relevant to you as a runner. So it's going to incorporate keeping your hamstrings on, having your feet on a surface, and alternating right to left. So for this exercise, you'll need a little ball or a rolled up towel, something that's about 4 to 6 inches in diameter. And so once you have that, you're going to find a place on the floor against a wall. So you need a blank wall and a ball or a rolled towel. So I have my little yoga mat here, and I'm going to angle the screen down so you can see. And I'm going to talk you through this exercise. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get your feet onto the wall with your hips and knees bent to 90 degrees. So it's like you're sitting in a chair and then a tornado came and just blew you over onto your back, but you're still in that chair position. So it looks like this. And I'm keeping that 90-degree angle from my heels to my hips. I'm going to take the ball and put it right here between my knees. And I'm going to very lightly squeeze it. I'm not trying to crush it. I'm just holding it there with my inner thoughts. This part is a little tricky, so I want you to pay attention You're going to inhale, and as you exhale, you're going to drag your heels down to curl just your tailbone off. Your lower back stays flat on the mat. So it's as if I'm pulling my heels down without actually moving them. That's very important because that's how you get your hamstrings. Your hamstrings turn on when you actively pull down with your heels. This might be a lot for some people just to try and figure out how to tuck your pelvis under, aka neutralize your pelvis from your hamstrings versus just muscling through it with your abs. So work on that a few times. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, drag your heels down to reach your knees to the ceiling. Good. Inhale, relax. And then again, exhale, reach your knees up by pulling heels down, whole foot contacting the wall, but especially being aware of those heels. Once you feel like you've got that down, you can start to alternate. So you can keep the pelvic tilt with your left leg, bring your right leg off the wall. You should really feel your left hamstring. You're going to inhale, and as you exhale, you're going to reach your left arm towards your right foot. Inhale, put your right foot back on the wall, keeping that pelvic tilt. You're going to switch legs. Exhale, reach to your opposite leg. Right arm to left leg. Make sure you didn't lose the pulling down of your heels. You're going to keep going back and forth. I'm really pulling down with my left heel, reaching with my left arm. Inhaling back to the wall. Exhale to switch. Now pulling down with right heel, reaching right arm. Do a couple more. Inhale, exhale, switch, reach. Inhale back to center. Exhale, reach. Pulling down with your heels strongly. Both feet on the wall, and relax your hips down. So a couple things to keep in mind during that exercise is you definitely want to keep your low back flat. So it's not a very high lift, it's just a little tilt of the pelvis initiated by the hamstrings. The other thing to keep in mind is you want to keep that pelvis lifted the whole time. So you're not lowering your pelvis down to lift one leg and the other. So you're working on keeping a neutral pelvis. Exhaling through your mouth helps you keep a neutral rib cage while you're alternating right, left, opposite arm to opposite leg. So this is beautiful for training you to feel reciprocating alternating activity, aka running in a flexed position. So now let's talk a little more anatomy. So why do I say that the left hamstring especially needs to be strong? And that is because of our anatomy, because you're a human being, and that is just the way we're made, is that left hamstring is going to need a little more attention for it to activate and recruit. And I'm going to share with you my screen here to show you a diagram that will be helpful. So this is an image of a torso kind of cut out. This is an image from the Postural Restoration Institute, and it's drawn by Elizabeth Noble, who does a lot of their anatomy drawings. So what this is trying to show you, and you're looking at a person from the front. So the right side of them is to your left, and the left side of them is to your right. So this cutout at the top part is your diaphragm, and there's more of a dome on the right side of the diaphragm. That's because there's a larger central tendon, or that white area just below the dome, on the right side than the left, which helps the right side be more domed. There's also 3 lung lobes on the right and only 2 on the left to make space for the heart. So the right side rib cage will just be more condensed in general anyway. The left side, you can see these ribs on the left are a little further apart. That's because that left rib cage is kind of more ballooning out, becoming more expansive. The right side is more compressed. Also, the right diaphragm has lower attachments of the crura of the diaphragm, or the little tendons that attach to your spine. They attach lower on the right than on the left. So that's going to start to pull your rib cage and spine to the right already. And because the left ribs are more flared, the left diaphragm is less supportive, and there's this pull towards the right, the left pelvis starts to tip forward. And so that left pelvis is already starting from a position of extension or tilting forward. So it's way more likely that we're going to feel comfortable standing over our right leg because that pelvis feels more stable under that nice domed diaphragm. That means that the pelvic floor on the right side is more domed, and that right inner thigh is more active, the right hamstring is more active. So all of us naturally are going to be biased to stand onto our right side, activate a right hamstring, and that left pelvis is going to be a little more tilted forward. Left hamstring's a little more difficult to recruit. And so working with runners, this pattern can be a lot of times amplified, because when you're doing a symmetrical activity, right, left, right, left, right, left, but you're asymmetrical inside, not to mention all the cortical structures in our brain are asymmetrical, but we're very driven onto our right side. So when we see this in runners, when you do that right, left, right, left, right, left alternating activity, it's going to promote this asymmetry. It's going to become more and more asymmetrical. So a lot of times the things that I see in runners, this isn't a complete list, but things that tell me right away that we're working with an asymmetry is when you look at a runner and they have uneven shoulder height, usually that right shoulder is a little dropped because everything's more condensed on this side. They're getting fatigued in a way that doesn't seem right to them for their level of training. And that's usually because they're not moving oxygen well, moving air well, using their body efficiently. A lot of times I'll see low back pain, SI joint pain from that overextended position, and also trying to find that rotation at a joint that's not meant to provide you that much rotation. Knee strain or pain. Again, your knees are a joint that's only really meant to hinge one way. It's not supposed to be a joint where you're getting a lot of rotation. And if your pelvis is tilting forward on one side, you're kind of starting in a rotated position, trying to run forward, that can put a lot of strain on the knees. And clicking or popping in your hips, usually a sign that those hips are not integrating well into socket from pelvis position, or for many other reasons. The hip joint, that's supposed to be a very mobile joint, your thigh bone into your pelvis joint. A lot of times that joint can become stiff when it's trying to stabilize you if you're getting too much motion from your low back, if you're really extended. And so we have to work on first stabilizing a pelvis so that those hips can move better. So that all said, we need to come back to a left hamstring, and to bring yourself back into neutral first, flexing your whole spine, finding ribs down, tailbone neutral, pelvis neutral, and just being able to alternate from there is great. But if you're doing any sort of distance, any sort of miles, you're going to quickly start to notice these asymmetries popping up, things you feel on one side versus the other. And the best thing you can do to start mitigating those problems or to prevent them before they happen is to pay some attention to your left hamstring. So now I'm going to show you an exercise that's one of my favorites. It's a little challenging, and it can be a little tougher on the wrists, but if you can do it, it's an excellent exercise to strengthen a left hamstring. So I'm going to show you one that's my favorite, and then I'll show you another that's really excellent as well, and it doesn't put as much strain on your wrists. So for this first exercise, you need a little ledge, like your bottom stairs, if you have stairs at your house, or any sort of block of wood that's about 4 to 5 inches in height. I'm going to use 2 yoga blocks that are 4 inches in height. So it doesn't have to be that high. You can use 2 textbooks that are 3 inches in height. Just make sure they're the same height. Just see what you can find. Kind of look around your house. You'd be surprised where you have some low ledges. Maybe if you have like a fireplace or something, there's usually a low ledge there. So see what you can find. And this is going to be a demonstration of a left hamstring exercise. So I'm going to use my 2 blocks. We're going to come back to our mat here. Okay, so make sure you can see me here. So here I have 2 blocks. They're about 4 inches high. That's probably about a good height. You could go a little lower, a little higher. And I'm going to put them behind me, maybe like a hand's width behind me. And I'm going to put my hands, fingers face forward on the edge of the blocks, the edge of your stair, whatever you're using at home. Knees are bent about 90 degrees. And then I'm going to press down with my hands to lift my hips up. And I'm going to pull my tailbone under with my heels as I exhale. So I'm kind of curling under. And then if you soften your elbows, that makes this a lot more challenging. So I'm actually pulling with my heels into the mat, digging back this way with my heels. So if the mat wasn't there, I would pull my heels back, but since the mat is there, it's pulling my pelvis under. From there, you're going to keep pulling with your left heel and reach your right leg long, keeping that pelvis tucked under. To make it a little harder, bring your pelvis back towards the blocks, but keep pulling with that left heel, reaching right leg long. And you just stay and hold here 4 or 5 breaths. Breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth. And you can bring your feet down, hips down, and relax. So that's helping recruit a left hamstring strongly by digging that heel back, helping your pelvis be in a neutral position, teaching that right leg to be a little bit more into that swinging position instead of being that strong stance leg. And it's giving you stabilization around your rib cage, which is going to help you as a runner as well by pushing down with your arms. So that exercise you can do about 4 or 5 breaths and repeat that for a total of 5 times. So let's try something that's going to be a little easier on the wrists, but still recruit a left hamstring. So you're going to put your mat up against a wall again. You don't have to use a mat, but it's just nice to have. And you're going to get in that same 90-90 position as before, except you don't need a ball for this one. So I'm going to get into that 90-90. And I'm going to put my feet on the wall. And then I'm going to breathe in through my nose. Through my mouth, I'm going to reach up to the ceiling with my knees by pulling my heels down just like before, low back staying flat on the mat. So I'm really just tilting my pelvis a tiny bit, and I really feel my hamstrings here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift my left knee a little lower than my right. So I feel my left hamstring more and I feel my left inner thigh. I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to take my right foot off the wall. And I'm reaching that right leg long, trying to keep right knee higher than the left. And I'm just going to tap my right heel on the wall 10 times, all the while keeping that pelvic tilt with my left heel pulling strongly down. Breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth. And when I've done 10 taps, I put my foot back on the wall and relax my hips down. And that one you could just repeat 2 more times, so 3 sets of 10. And if you would like handouts of these exercises, I'm going to try and make them available on my website. So keep checking for those. And of course, send me an email if you are interested in getting the exercises and you're not finding them, and I will make sure I get those to you. Okay. So I feel like we have had a good rundown of why it's important to keep your hamstring strong, why it's important to especially keep your left hamstring strong, especially for a runner. Now, something that I get asked a lot, or I see a lot, and it can be beneficial but can also be harmful, is stretching your hamstrings. So I don't know why, but stretching your hamstrings just became this thing that like everybody does and everybody feels like they should do, and like the longer your hamstrings the better. And I'm just gonna say this, I know it's like very contrary to what everyone has heard, but it's not really that important or helpful to have really long hamstrings, and having over lengthened hamstrings can be very harmful and difficult to come back from. So this is because of everything we talked about before. If your hamstrings are very long and they don't have any resting tone, then you're kind of stuck in that forwardly tipped pelvis position. So if you're somebody who kind of has a really arched back and you tend to kind of lock out your knees, like this is the posture I often see, instead of being neutral, we'll kind of stick out the butt and lock out the knees. And you might not even realize that you're standing like that. You'll feel the weight in your toes. So when the weight's in your heels, that recruits hamstrings. That neutralizes the pelvis. And then we can have some tone in the hamstring muscles to stabilize us. So tone is different than length. Tone is how much a muscle is on. So muscles don't just turn on to do a motion and then turn off. They always have some kind of resting tone, is what we call it, some activity. If I didn't have resting tone in my neck and in my trunk, I wouldn't be able to sit up here talking to you. I would just kind of melt into a blob. So all of our muscles do that, especially the ones that help us stand. And your hamstrings need to be able to turn on when you need them to. So if you're, a yogi or a dancer, and for your sport, you need to be able to put your leg behind your head or do the full splits, that's fine because you're turning off that tone and letting that muscle lengthen. You trained your body to do that. That's just a problem when you are just standing there or running or doing a sport where you really need that muscle to be on and it doesn't know how to turn on. So a good way to check this is just to see if you can stand and fold forward and touch your toes. So that's a great way to see, okay, is your hamstring a good length? And that has a little caveat to it, but all you would do basically is just a toe touch. So you stand with your, feet about hip width apart, bend forward. You should be able to just lightly touch your toes. If you're going further than that, like your palms are flat on the floor, that's too much. That means you have over-lengthened hamstrings or over-lengthened back muscles, or your pelvic floor muscles aren't stabilizing you well. So then I would definitely do one of those exercises with your feet on the wall, but it might be hard for you to feel your hamstrings in that position if you're that over-lengthened. So you can try putting your heels a little higher, or put just a little like really flat towel just under your tailbone to help you lift your pelvis and feel those hamstrings pulling down. Now, if you're in the opposite camp, where you go to touch your toes and you're like, there's no way. And this is what I see a lot more with runners is our muscles get really strong and they get more tight. And we feel like we can't touch our toes and there's no way that's going to happen. Then it might be okay to stretch your hamstrings, but you have to make sure that you're actually truly testing the length of your hamstrings and not the position of your pelvis. Because of the things we talked about earlier, the position of your pelvis can make your hamstrings appear long or short. So let me give another example of this. So say I have normal length hamstrings, but my pelvis is tipped forward. So my hamstring attachments are here at the back of my knee, all the way up to the sit bone here. So if I tip my pelvis forward, I've made this distance from my sit bone to the back of my knee longer. So my hamstrings essentially are already a little bit lengthened here. And if I try to bend forward from there, I'm not going to be able to really reach my toes because my pelvis is in a position that they're already lengthened a little bit. But if I can tuck my pelvis under, I can get there because I just brought this attachment down closer to the other attachment. So I would caution you to not stretch your hamstrings until you've convinced yourself that your hamstrings are in a neutral, that your pelvis is in a neutral position. So a way that you can do that is first by doing those exercises I showed you, primarily the first one with your feet on the wall, alternating, that's getting your pelvis neutralized with your hamstrings. So try that first and then see if it's easier for you to touch your toes. And if you really, really feel like you want to stretch your hamstrings, do it in a position that your hamstrings are, or that your pelvis is neutral. So I'm going to show you a couple ways to stretch your hamstrings if you really feel like you need to, or feels like your toes are really, really far away. But just understand that if you start to get your hamstrings working as a pelvis neutralizer and you're getting your pelvis to a neutral position, you may not ever need to stretch your hamstrings. And it's definitely not helpful to go and stretch your hamstrings before a run because you want those muscles to be working for you when you run. And stretching is an inhibitory technique. That means that when you stretch a muscle and you hold that stretch for a long time, that makes that muscle not work as much. It makes it quiet down. That's what we call an inhibitory action for a muscle. So you don't want that muscle to be kind of off when you're about to go do an activity where you need it to be really on. So if you must stretch, do it after your runs and try to keep it minimal and try to keep it with the neutral pelvis. Okay, so let's look at some ways that you can stretch that will be helpful or at least not harmful. So we're going to come back to our mat and I'm going to flip the direction one more time. So I love this exercise because it's so simple, but it can help you lengthen your hamstrings and also help them learn how to tone properly. So you just lay here, or excuse me, sit here with your feet just kind of splayed and your legs out in front of you. For some of you that might look like this. So wherever you are, it's okay to bend your knees, but trying to kind of find that straight position, feeling your sit bones, so those bones at the base of your pelvis. Now, a lot of you do yoga or try to really sit up straight here, but I would recommend against that, right? Because we want to just let those ribs come down and be able to put air into our upper back here into those ribs. So then what I'm going to do from here with a straight spine, so I'm not slumped and I'm not arched, I'm just stacked. And if you need to bend your knees up so that you're not really rounded, please do that. And wherever you are, you're just going to turn your feet in so that your toes are pointing up to the ceiling, your kneecaps are pointing up to the ceiling, and pull your toes back towards you. Again, resisting the urge to come forward, just stacking your rib cage over your pelvis, and feel your sit bones on the floor, the bony protrusions at the base of your pelvis. Keep reaching your heels away, toes towards you, and lightly press your heels down into the earth, and you should feel some engagement deep in your abdomen. So this is a wonderful place to work here. Just letting those hamstrings lengthen in a way that you know you have a neutral pelvis, and breathing here into your upper back. Exhaling through your mouth, letting those front ribs come down. Inhale into your upper back. And I'm going to add one more thing. Exhale through your mouth all the way to the bottom of your breath, and then pause at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, and then breathe in through your nose. And that will help air move into your lower back lungs, training you to be a better athlete, a more efficient athlete. And after 4 or 5 breaths, you can relax and repeat that 4 more times. So if that feels accessible to you, that's one way to work on those hamstrings from a neutral pelvis. Another way, if you must stretch, is by stretching from a neutral pelvis. So I use 2 chairs for this, but you can use a low bench or a stool, or excuse me, not a stool, but a coffee table or something. You want to find a seat that when you sit on it, your hips and knees are bent to 90 degrees. And what that does is it keeps your pelvis in a neutral position. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to put one leg up on the chair in front of you, or if you're sitting on the edge of a coffee table or a low bench, then you're just having this leg on the bench and this leg is just off of it, because this bent knee is what's keeping that pelvis in neutral position. Then what you're going to do is you're going to think about suctioning the leg that's straight back. So I'm trying to bring this, in my case, my left knee back behind my right knee. I'm kind of suctioning that hip into its socket. From there, I'm going to reach for my left toes. I'm going to stay here and breathe 4 or 5 breaths. Same breathing pattern, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Pulling my toes back towards me. Exhaling, ribs down, pausing. And then when I breathe in, I'm inflating my upper back. And a little pause at the bottom of the exhale will help with that. You can do that 4 or 5 breaths. You can do that on both sides. Just see if it feels different side to side. Just remembering to suck that leg that's straight back into socket and reaching and pulling your toes back. So, just to recap, if your hamstrings aren't long enough or you can't touch your toes, make sure first that your pelvis is neutral. And you can do that by doing the first exercise we did with the alternating arm reach, feet on the wall, hips and knees bent to 90 degrees. And if your hamstrings are over lengthened and you can palm the floor, that's too much. You need to think about either strengthening and toning your hamstrings, your abdominals, and perhaps even your pelvic floor muscles, because pelvic floor muscles are also a dynamic stabilizer of our pelvis. And so if your pelvis is tilted way forward past neutral, there's probably some pelvic floor issues there, and you need to, when you do these exercises, great, but the ones on your back with your feet on the wall, maybe put a little towel just under your tailbone, not your lower back, to keep your pelvis neutral. And definitely do the pelvis neutralizing exercises. You might need a little more time and awareness to find those hamstrings. And then going back all the way to the beginning, it's good to keep your hamstrings strong, both sides, especially on the left. So there's some exercises that I showed you to use both of your hamstrings in an alternating reciprocating fashion. That will be a great carryover to running. And then I showed you one exercise where you're really working that left hamstring, teaching that left side to be as strong and stable when you stand onto it as your right side. So this is just kind of some quick tips and overview. And if you have questions for me directly, you can email me at Deria, DERYA, at myessentialpt.com. And I'm happy to hear from you, hear your feedback, and to answer any questions. Yeah, so please feel free to reach out. And thank you so much for tuning in.